Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about enlightenment. I found myself writing some notes this morning, just flowing out of me. And then I thought, well, if I just expand upon them, then maybe there's something here you would benefit from. I certainly do, actually. Sometimes the things that I write down, I hadn't really thought too much about. They seem to be downloaded from somewhere, and that's great. The first thing I'd like to say is that enlightenment is something that is with everybody, because we are all part of everything that ever existed. And the only thing that creates a limit on that, and that we can't see that or enjoy that, or experience that, is because we are covered in our experience, our experience of life is covered by the mind. The mind is a very temporary thing. It's something that it finds itself disconnected for some reason from life itself. It just doesn't realize what we are. And it's searching all the time to survive and to be somebody and to find things that already are. It's a bit of a rat race. It's like a dog chasing its tail, you know. And we get so used to being in the mind that we think it's normal. We think the way we are is okay. But there is an absolutely, completely other experience if we're able to sidestep from it. Now, if you want an example of like how we've inherited this, because it's an inheritance, really. You know, you can imagine two fish in a fish bowl, and one of them says to the other, hey, you know, what do you think of the water? And the other fish is like, what water, you know? It's so used to living in water. Its ancestors lived in water. It doesn't know what water is anymore. And so it's unable to gain perspective, you know. I had a little dog, Leon his name was, and we had him as a puppy, and he was fed every day and he's warm every night, and he didn't need anything at all. He was happy as can be. And then one day out in the fields, he saw a rabbit, chased it and killed it. And you know, you can imagine a conversation with him. I could say, Leon, why did you do that for? And he'd say, oh, I don't know really. And I'd say, well, you're going to eat it. Eat it? That? Ugh, don't think so. And but what you're seeing is like he might be confused at that moment, because he's doing something that is in his DNA. It's come down thousands of years. It's the same with all the animals, you know. You know, how do some animals just automatically run up trees? How do other animals bury under the ground? No one's taught them. It's in them, you know. And in the same way, in the physical side, in the human species side of mankind, we have many, many propensities. We have many things that we do that we do not know why we do. And most of it is driven by the mind. And that mind is quite dominant. And we need to be able to step aside from it. And that may seem difficult. It's like saying to the fish, you know, step aside from the water. It's like, I mean, that would be a real difficult thing for the fish to work out, wouldn't it? How can I get perspective, you know? But we can do this. And so that's why I'd like to do this talk a bit this morning. I suppose all my talks in many ways are all pointing in the same direction. But it doesn't matter how much somebody points there, it can never create an experience for you. You have to have your own experience. And all the talks you ever hear and any books you ever read will only ever be signposts along the way. So, hopefully, there might be something in this today that you might be in the supermarket next week and go, oh, bingo, I got it, you know. It could happen anywhere. So I'll just share from my notes, and hopefully, like I say, something might just click. All right. So we know that the mind is prompted all the time by its inexplicable emptiness. It always wants things all the time. And it's always trying to find a way to be. You know, its identity is very, very important to it, you know. You never see this in the animal kingdom. They just are who they are. Same with trees, nature. They just are what they are. But we're not like that at all, and that's because the mind doesn't know really what it's doing, you know. So it's looking for an identity, it's looking for fulfillment. And it searches for the elements that are clearly missing. You don't search, do you, unless something's missing. And that's what the human does, is looking and searching and making goals, making plans all the time. The one thing it never seems to be able to do very well is just be, is just exist, And it's always trying to figure things out. But the experience it seeks, the status that the mind is looking for, isn't actually missing. It's only missing from the mind itself. For some reason, the mind is blind to what it's looking for. It's all around it. It's right at its fingertips, but it cannot see it, cannot experience it. In reality, all of existence is one flowing thing that does not understand itself. It doesn't need to understand it. It's just one flowing big thing that doesn't need self-understanding. Because it just is. It just exists. Conversely, the mind of a human is in a state whereby it feels disconnected from the whole. So you've got the whole of life functioning as one thing, but the human mind feels disconnected. It feels lost. And in being and feeling disconnected, it tries every which way to resolve that emptiness. And we get dragged along in its miserable endeavour, because we have emotions and everything else, and so we feel its pain, we feel its lostness, we feel the way it feels, and we can feel that way for so long we don't know any other way, we just think it's normal. But the mind, at best, is only its own idea. It's just an idea. The whole thing of it is only an outlook. It's an opinion. But it's an idea that imposes its alienation upon us as individuals. In fact, the mind is its own problem. It lives in the problem. It sees from the problem. It perceives from the problem. And even when truth comes along, in the form of words like Jesus. Now let's remember, Jesus wasn't very religious at all. He was an enlightened master, as far as I can see. But he often would say things and people just couldn't grasp it. But when they did, and they had some kind of enlightenment, some kind of, oh yeah, oh wow, they woke up to some spiritual words, he would say, flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, In other words, flesh and blood meaning your mind. You didn't get this from your mind. This is from outside your mind. You're trapped in your mind. And you need to get out of that. And that's where this truth has come from. When people went to see Ramana Maharshi, he was a very, very famous and incredible mystic in India. Only died in 1950. People flocked to him from all over the world. And it was fascinating because he used to say, just sit quietly with me. And he said the communication comes outside voice, outside ears, outside what you might call the senses. The mind is very preoccupied with senses. If it can't sense things, it won't believe them. But his communication came outside of that. And I think all the mystics were that way, really. That the real communication happens outside of the natural senses. Now let's just imagine that a mind, just a silly mind, thinks it's found all truth. I mean, it's almost like a joke. I mean, that's what it's trying to do. So that's where it thinks it's going to end up. But it's almost like a joke to think that it could do that. How can an explanation of all emanate from like what is clearly an unreliable piece of human hardware? It is very unreliable, isn't it? And that very hardware it's an evolving organism. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny element that arises very briefly, then falls back into the greater sea of intelligent existence. When you think of all of life, your particular human mind, my particular human mind, is just a tiny thing. It's just evolving in it all. So how can one small, nervous, lost part contain the answer to all these things? How's it going to gather all that information? I mean, don't forget, it's not even lost. It just thinks it's part of everything, but it thinks it's not. It's trying to find its way back, but it already is part of everything. It's just confused. So when you think about it, What's the mind going to do to find itself? Is it going to become cleverer and cleverer and cleverer? It's going to gather all the information it possibly can. But when you think of it, it can only become cleverer about things that were already there in the first place. These things already exist, so it's going to relearn them, but those things don't need to be relearned because it's already there in the first place. So why can't the mind see this? The entire premise that the mind can ascertain unto complete enlightenment is really preposterous because it's only ever finding what's there anyhow. What's there anyhow is not searching. What's there anyhow hasn't got a problem. What's there anyhow isn't brought to completion by being seen by a mind. What's there anyhow doesn't suddenly become the intellectual property rights of a single mind just because the mind glimpses it. And there we have it, the glimpse. The glimpse is the end game, really. Once we glimpse, we realize we already are what we glimpse and realize that we were it all along. That's the thing. And that's why the enlightened ones laugh, and I know this laugh, when they realize they already were the one that they'd been looking for. It's just that was hidden behind the perceptions of the mind. There is a law in spirituality that says that what we see, what we glimpse, we possess. We possess the thing that we see. Or once realization happens. See, realization isn't thinking. Realization is something that just arises from another place and is beyond the mind. So once realization happens, we find that we always were, always will be, and are that which existed in the first place. We were there all along. Ramana Maharshi again spoke of this moment of seeing or glimpsing and said, at that moment, the mind simply falls back into the greater body of everything that already was. So basically the mind falls out of its delusion of separateness. And don't forget that you can start to see, maybe, I don't know, I can see this as I'm even reading it, that the mind, what it does is it's in a delusion, and we start to see, gosh, this is a big delusion. And what it does is it falls out of its delusion of separateness. It just falls back into the greater body of everything that exists. I mean, it's a good exercise to ask, what is the mind doing and why? If all truth and reality is there to be discovered and found, then all truth and reality must have existed in the first place. It's already, what I'm trying to say is, the mind's already looking for everything, but it's already there. So you have to ask yourself, why can't I see that? Why is the mind not able to see that? So the mind is wholly unreliable in this way. So we must come to realize that the mind is unable to grasp eternal reality. That's just impossible. It can't do it. It's not designed for that. It's never going to happen. The part that searches in all of its hollow hunger drags the human into its vortex of need. We think it's our emptiness, our lost state, our need to come home. If one is able to realize this, then it's the realizer that stands in the truth. Can you see that? When you realize something, you're standing in the truth because you're able now to see. It's like the fish finally sees the water, or the dog suddenly finally asks himself the question, why did I do that? But he didn't. He just kept chasing rabbits, But we're different. We can figure this out. To realize the lost perception of the mind, to sort of realize that your mind is lost, is to not be that mind. I'm going to say that again. To realize the lost perception of the mind is to not be that mind. To realize is to stand apart from that which is realized. When we realize, we're standing apart, we're standing away from that which we're waking up to. It's like as if a dream is pretending to be real. And in the dream we're so caught up in it, but then we realize When we wake up, we realise it's just a dream. So realisation, see, is a greater part. When we wake up in the morning, we realise it was a dream. We're superior to the dream, and the dream falls away. And it's the same in life. There is a sense in which the covering of the mind, the perceptions of the mind, the way it feels, the way it's looking, and all its state is really can be awakened from. You can realise it. You can realise that that's what the mind is doing. That's what it's like. And you can realise it's blind and unable to deliver that which it's looking for. So the mind is revealed as flawed, limited and unfit to be the tabernacle of all truth. It's just not designed for it. So who or what stands apart, glimpsing? Who's the one who realizes? What is realization? Is it our realization? In fact, what is a glimpse? You see, the egoic mind, like I said before, has wrapped itself around the human sense of awareness. And of course, life is then seen through its kaleidoscopic view. So it's like it's put itself as a big lens over your life, and you're looking out and your perceptions are taken up with the view of that kaleidoscope of the mind. A glimpse is a realization of what really is, and what really is beyond the kaleidoscopic mind. Even if we were able to remove the narrative of the mind, just the talk, the chat that comes with everything, life would be extremely different. And so this is just the talk, okay? We could just turn the volume off the mind. Imagine how different life would be. Shakespeare said, there is nothing, either good or bad, except the mind would make it so. So the mind's making its mind up all the time. This is good, this is bad, this is fat, this is thin, this is old, this is young. And it's judging and splitting and judging and splitting. And that's dualism, It's just splitting everything all the time in its judgment. And it just never stops. But can you imagine life without that? It would be quite incredible. King David wrote a very famous psalm, I'm sure you know this. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Well, he wasn't saying he didn't want the heavens, he didn't want the revelation. He was saying he wouldn't be in want. You see, the mind is always in want, and the mind is always in need, and the mind's always searching and looking. It always feels sorry for itself. It's very quick to recognize that someone's got more than it. And what David was saying is, now that I've come out of my mind, now that I'm in the place where I should be, I don't have that sense of want anymore. The testimony of those who realize these things, you catch a glimpse of stepping away from the mind. What they say, I've experienced this myself, is that life suddenly becomes very still. There's peace, and all the striving is gone. When we first have these experiences, they tend to come and go. Now and again you get somebody in history who has a full-blown experience of this, and they never really come back into the mind, but most people kind of come in and out of it. But it's the beginning of the cracking of the egg. The journey has begun, and the sort of separation from the mind can be completed. One thing you cannot do with this is act. You can't act it out. It's just the product. It's the product of the mind falling away. When the mind's fallen away, you just end up in this place and you're free. Just to give you an example, I've had quite a number of experiences myself, and one of them wasn't far from here. I was just walking down the lane, and just out of the blue, I found that I'd stepped away from all that was mental, all that was of the mind, and I'd never felt so strange, so different. And I could see the culprit. I could see the mind. Like there was like this hanging thing. That was maybe a mental representation of it. And for all that mind had ever caused me trouble all my life, for all the problems that didn't exist that it convinced me of, and all the bothersome ways of it over the years, because I'd stepped away from it, there was no anger in me. There was no irritation in me. There was nothing. I was just part of eternity. And I know this sounds very, very strange because you'll be listening with your ears, which are natural things, using your mind, which is a natural thing. But I looked out across a field and I could see eternity. It was all within what seemed like a red cloak. And all of existence was there. I was part of it and it was part of me. I was it and it was me. We were just one thing. I'd heard about this. I'd read about it. But this is the first time I'd actually experienced it. And it was one of the most phenomenal experiences of my life. And I have to say, I didn't plan to say this, but I think it's worth saying. You know, you have to remember that humanity is a species, and the species of humanity, just like all of the living things, is evolving. There was a time when mankind, you call it the golden age of mankind, there was a time when mankind didn't have a mind like it has today. It hadn't developed. And therefore, much like the animals and much like other living things, there was a sort of peace there, you know. But the mind did grow, and that's why we became the dominant species. You know, we learned to hunt, we learned to think things through, but mostly it was based upon fear, and that's why we have groundless fears, because we've inherited them. You know, we only have to open our eyes in the morning to know what fear feels like, because worries start coming in and problems start arising, and then we have to find solutions for them. But they were only imagination in the first place. So you got an imaginary fear, and now you've got an imaginary solution, and it's tiring, you know. No wonder people get ill. No wonder they can't function properly. So, where is mankind up to in the evolution of this? Well, we've damaged the earth quite a lot, haven't we? We only have to look at man's behaviour towards one another, and we see we're quite damaging to each other. And it's quite shameful, it's embarrassing, you know. But the answer lies very close to home, and it lies within what I've just talked about now. I mean, I could just give you a quick question and say to you, you know, what would the world be like if we were all content? What would it be like if we weren't grasping? What would it be like if we weren't all showing off, trying to prove our identity? What would the world be like if we didn't look down on people and we never felt looked down upon? I mean, I could go on and on about this, but that is just one step away from where we are right now. It is a natural part of our upbringing, a natural part of our development from children, that the mind covers who we really are. And that mind then, we find it difficult to think our way out of it. We don't know why we do what we do any more than my dog knew what he was doing, or the fish knows what the fish is doing, or a hawk, first time out of the nest, flies through the sky, doesn't know why it spotted a vole on the ground, it doesn't know why it's streaking downwards to kill it, but is quite an expert at it because of its DNA. And we're like that, see. But we're far more than our DNA. We're far more than our mind. We're far more than our natural ways. And the evolution of mankind has reached a point now where right across the world we're asking ourselves some very serious questions. Why am I like this? It's become very personal. It needs to become personal. And what I'd like to just encourage you in today is enlightenment isn't something you reach and like a qualification at school or college. It's already in you, but it's beyond your mind. So if you can find some awareness, find a way of awakening, find a way of becoming, awakened really, then you'll see your mind. if you start to see the behavior of your mind, it diminishes the behavior of your mind. It starts to break it down. Because don't forget, it's only an idea, the mind. It's just an idea. Its personality is made up of ideas. And those ideas are only strengthened by your belief in them. So if you find out that then that's not real, then you give it no more strength. Then you find that you will start to change. Slowly. Like a flower. I've got a flower here on my table in my living room. And I remember there was no flower there, it was just a bud. But now it's a full flower. But I didn't see the sort of, you don't actually see it growing, do you? It sort of happens slowly. But that's what happens with us. Once we start to realise, we break out. Who we really are starts to break through. And that which is false, that which is the mind, that which is, even say stupid, falls away. And so, there we go. I hope this is of some help to you. And I wish you a good day.